He thought he'd made it through the worst of the storm. But when his house stood strong while others were destroyed, his nightmare was just beginning. The Homeowners Association didn't just accuse him of being lucky, they accused him of causing the hurricane itself. And they wanted $10 million. James Carter had never imagined his dream home would become a battleground. After years of renting in cramped apartments, he finally bought a modest home on the edge of a small suburban neighborhood. His family, his wife Tasha, and 2 kids were overjoyed. They had their own backyard, a big oak tree in the front yard, and space to breathe. Life was good. Then came Hurricane Simone. The hurricane was one of the most intense storms to hit the area in years. The media warned of devastation. Roofs would be torn off. Floods would sweep through the streets. The entire region was on high alert. But in all the chaos, something strange happened. James's house stood firm. While neighboring homes were damaged beyond recognition, his property was untouched. He didn't think much of it at first. Maybe his house was just built better. Maybe luck was on his side. Little did James know, his good fortune was about to become his greatest curse. It wasn't long before the whispers began. Neighbors would stop by, peering across James's fence, eyeing the undamaged house with suspicion. Some muttered about the house being too perfect, too untouched. At the local cafe, the talk of the town quickly turned to James Carter. How did his house survive while everyone else's fell apart? One neighbor asked. It's almost like he made it happen. James laughed it off. People love a good conspiracy theory, he joked to his wife one night. But the tone in the neighborhood was changing. The Homeowners Association, the show, was taking notice. Letter arrived 2 weeks after the storm. It was polite at first. Dear Mr. Carter, we hope this letter finds you well after the recent hurricane. It has come to our attention that your house appears to have been unaffected by the storm, while several others in the neighborhood suffered significant damage. We ask that you schedule an inspection to ensure that your property complies with all community standards. James read the letter and shrugged. The HOA was just doing its job, right? They had to inspect everything after a big storm, but that was just the beginning. A few days later, the HOA came knocking. James welcomed the inspectors in, assuming they were there for the usual checks. But the conversation quickly took a sharp turn. Mr. Carter, the HOA president Richard Park, began, "We've reviewed the situation, and we have some concerns. Your house, well, it's standing, completely unharmed. Meanwhile, the neighbors' homes, we're talking major structural damage. You see, this doesn't look like normal weather patterns. It's almost as if your property somehow avoided the worst of the storm." James frowned, unsure of where this was going. Richard continued, "There are some unusual reports. We've heard rumors. The neighbors are asking how your house was so perfectly intact. There are even talks about whether you somehow manipulated the storm." The words hit James like a slap. "Manipulated?" he repeated, his voice shaking. "Are you serious?" Richard didn't flinch. "This isn't just about bad weather anymore. There are reports suggesting that your house could have been engineered to withstand such a storm, or perhaps even encourage the storm to target other homes." James blinked. Was this some kind of twisted joke? But the cold look in Richard's eyes told him otherwise. Days turned into weeks, and the situation only grew worse. James started receiving daily notices from the HOA, demanding that he provide detailed reports on the construction of his home and evidence that he hadn't somehow caused the hurricane. Then, the final blow came. The HOA issued a formal demand. "Dear Mr. Carter, after thorough investigation, the HOA believes that your house played a role in the unexpected nature of the storm. As such, we are demanding compensation for damages sustained by the neighborhood. We are requesting a payment of $10 million for the costs incurred by the hurricane's destruction of surrounding properties, as well as legal fees and potential damages from your property's suspected influence on the storm." James felt his blood run cold. This couldn't be real. He tried to call the HOA office, but his calls were ignored. He reached out to friends, but no one could believe it. The more James tried to explain himself, the more he felt like he was being pulled into a nightmare that no one would believe. Tasha was in disbelief. She couldn't understand why this was happening, but James was determined to fight back. They consulted lawyers, but each one had the same reaction. "This is insane." One lawyer even suggested that the HOA's actions might be illegal, but their influence in the community was so powerful that fighting them would be nearly impossible. Meanwhile, the HOA began spreading rumors of their own. Neighbors who had once been friendly now avoided the Carters. The once quiet street was now filled with tension. Some even started blaming James for the storm, whispering that he had somehow made a deal with some supernatural force. Others went further, alleging he had somehow engineered the weather to destroy their homes, because why else would his property be untouched? James was fighting a battle on two fronts, against a faceless bureaucracy and a community that had turned against him. Desperate, James began to investigate the HOA's past. What he uncovered was chilling. The HOA had been involved in shady practices for years, using its power to push out minorities and raise fees to line its pockets. The more James dug, the more he realized that this wasn't about the hurricane at all. The HOA was using the storm as an excuse to target his family because they were black. They couldn't stand that James had a house in pristine condition when so many others were devastated. They wanted him gone, and they would do whatever it took to force him out. But James had a secret weapon, the truth. With the help of a seasoned attorney, James filed a lawsuit against the HOA for defamation, harassment, and extortion. The HOA responded with a counterclaim, but James wasn't backing down. He had a community behind him, even if the HOA didn't realize it. The news spread like wildfire. The neighborhood divided. Some residents began supporting James, realizing how far the HOA had gone. Others were too afraid to speak out, terrified of losing their own homes. James went public. He shared his story with the media, and soon the story went viral. The $10 million demand became a symbol of abuse of power, and the tide began to turn in James's favor. After months of legal battles and public outrage, the court ruled in James's favor. The HOA was forced to drop all charges, issue an apology, and pay for James's legal fees. The victory wasn't just for James and his family. It was a victory for anyone who had ever been targeted by a system of power and corruption. James had proven that no matter how impossible the battle, truth and courage could still prevail. James Carter's battle wasn't just about a house. It was about standing up against an unjust system, a system that tried to crush him for simply being who he was. This story reminds us that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not in the courtroom or the streets, but within our hearts. What would you do if your dream home became your worst nightmare? 13 Mansek, and Maki Wester.